What makes a good adventure game? Well, yes, there's dungeons and enemies and puzzles, yeah, we know about all of that, but there's also the various characters that you meet along the way. Many often intrigue the player with their stories and purpose in the game's narrative, however little it may be. Even if all they do is say, it's dangerous to go alone, or it's a secret to everybody, or I am error. These NPCs are often important building blocks for the game's structure as a whole, so I decided to rank them in terms of quality. And by that I mean their overall writing quality, their presence in narrative, their design, most importantly though, their purpose in gameplay. These guidelines probably aren't going to be followed through perfectly. In fact, it's really more of a side character ranking, as I won't include main story characters like the Zeldas, for example, even though she's never been playable in a mainline game, mostly. In the end, I'm really just ranking these characters based on how much I like them in their game, but I do want to try to be impartial and to explain why I placed them where I did on the ranking. Oh, one more thing, NPC in this case might stand for non-playable character, but characters like Cafe and Tingle will still be included in the ranking despite the fact they do not actually qualify as a non-playable character due to, being playable. Also, I won't be including literally every single NPC in this series in this ranking, because, like, Breath of the Wild alone has like 300. Oh, speaking of which, this video was written before Breath of the Wild 2, Tears of the Kingdom, has come out, so don't feel like I'm leaving out any characters from that game for any reason. I just don't know about any of them. Any of the new ones, anyway. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and like the video to tell YouTube to get its act together. Kiki, A Link to the Past. F this thing. You have to pay at least 110 rupees for progression. And if this was part of a greater narrative of how you have to bow down to some characters in Dark World to make any sort of progress, I'd be more forgiving, but it's not. Only Kiki forces you to pay cash to open a door. Farron, Skyward Sword. The other dragons don't do enough to get mentioned, but this one does, unfortunately. The writers accidentally ended up making her as unlikable as possible by making her constantly doubt your deeds and intentions. Thus, ecological disasters be damned, she makes the adventure longer than it needs to be, effectively helping the villains. Terrible character. Beaver Brothers, Majora's Mask. They have out-of-place designs, no interesting time-related dialogue, and they host one of the most boring and time-consuming side quests of Majora's Mask. And I'm not just talking about the empty bottle. The fact they also have a piece of heart that you can only get if you race them 4 times, and in the original there was no indication they even had it, it just drives me up the wall. Hudson, Breath of the Wild. I love the idea of building a town from nothing, so the Tarrytown Reconstruction side quest ought to be one of my favorites in Breath of the Wild. However, I remember the whole experience being dragged down through nonsensical stipulations, and they all came from this guy. Granted, he's also the one who started the project, so I wanted to give him another chance, so I went back and looked at why I hated this guy so much, because, I mean, he couldn't be that bad, right? And he isn't. He's worse. Really, reading back through most of his dialogue, I feel like the reason why I'm gonna put him this low is solely because he's so goddamn boring. Every time he talks, he feels like he lacks any enthusiasm for anything you help him with, or anything he wants you to help him with. I just can't believe that he has the charisma to gather and keep an entire town of specific people together. It just makes no sense to me. And it's too bad because Bolson, who we worked with before dealing with this guy, just seems comparatively well suited to head a construction project like this, because he's got the charisma, enthusiasm, and personality for it. Personally, if he had been in charge, it would have made the side quest a lot less frustrating to look back at, and probably just in general too. Also, Hudson's design is ugly as hell, like seriously. Sage, The Legend of Zelda, The Adventure of Link. What a cursed downgrade. Apparently this dude, whose name I had to look up, is the same type of dude as the old man from Zelda 1, except this one has no lines at all, and his one act is to force the player to fight Dark Link to prove themselves that they are worthy to take the Triforce of Courage from... Okay, look, if I die, Ganon resurrects, so are you on my side or not, you wise old bastard? Tallow and Bet, Twilight Princess. I don't know which one's worse. Actually, you know what? Story-wise, Bet at least seems to grow up, while Tallow feels like he just loses the opportunity to f*** around with you. The Monkeys, Majora's Mask. I didn't like Kiki, why would I like any of these guys any better? They don't force me to pay them, but they block my way until I essentially agreed to their demands. Almost as bad if you ask me. Mako Tree, Seasons, Oracle Games. Prince Rallis, Twilight Princess. I legit do not remember anything about this guy. He's basically a Ruto, but a boy, and he gets Kamali's character arc through his dead mom, I think. If that's the case, that means he's got nothing unique about him, and thus explains why I feel he's forgettable. Oh, right. He gives us the earrings, right? To get a stinky fish or whatever. Yeah, that still makes him pretty boring. Zill, Wind Waker. F off, Booger Kid. Bunyo, Spirit Tracks. What the f? Does Steen exist? Does Steen has a wife? Andrew's grandmother, Majora's Mask. This character has some nuance to her portrayal, although it's not that unique of a portrayal. What separates her from other characters in Majora's Mask is that she's a strangely effective way to pass the time from the first day all the way to the final day at 8 PM, thanks to her ridiculously long but boring stories from how the game portrays it. I think in the 3DS version that might have been made pointless due to how crazy debuffed the Song of Double Time got in that game, however. Whatever the case, the reason I placed her so low is because she hosts one of the dumbest heart pieces in the game, possibly the entire series. You're supposed to listen to her stories with this bondage mask on to be able to see their extended versions as well as being able to answer her question after them. The first story you have to answer correctly to get a piece of heart. The second story requires you to answer incorrectly, which makes her exclaim that you listened well and gives you her second piece of heart. Answer correctly, and she gives you nothing. Now, yes, if you're following a guide, this probably didn't cause you grief, but I wasn't. And let's just say I kept answering correctly over and over and over, wondering why the hell she wasn't giving me anything for doing so. It never ever occurred to me to just purposely answer incorrectly. At least not until my 7th playthrough or something. Completely ridiculous troll logic from Nintendo, I tell you all. Death Mountain Trail Gatekeeper, Ocarina of Time. Not only does he mock you if you don't show him the letter that grants you passage to Death Mountain right away, but he then asks you to get a key and mask for him afterwards. Once you have it, he expects you to sell it to him, but if you refuse to do so because you thought he was too mean, well, he proceeds to shut the gate until you agree to his demand. Ugh, an unprofessional jerk. It sounds lame too, by the way. Impa, Oracle Games. Easily the worst Impa out of all when it comes to design. Like, seriously, where's her legs? What is up with those dripless clothes? She's not much better when it comes to character either. Tsunagi, Wind Waker. Sploosh. Scrapper, Skyward Sword. This is an annoying talking tool, nothing more. Bucha, Skyward Sword. Some races I feel were wasted, while some I just never want to see again. This is one of those races. And yes, it is because they look like nutsacks. Impas, Twilight Princess. This crazy cat lady is so boring, they changed her name from Impa to Impas to not tarnish the iconic character's image. Moblin, The Legend of Zelda. I really am on the fence on whether or not I should include this one. I mean, this is basically a generic enemy. But occasionally you find this guy in a secret cave and he gives us a very memorable quote as a reward for doing so. And some money too. That definitely helps, that's for sure. There's also that one Moblin, at least I think it was a Moblin, who blocks the way into a dungeon until you give him food, which is kind of arbitrary when you think about it. I mean, why is it that I can kill every normal Moblin in the overworld, but not that one? Yeah, low tier for sure, just because, yes, sorry, not sorry. Agina, A Link to the Past. This dude looks exactly like Sarah, what's his name, but a little greener. Talks about the Book of Mordor, which is a pretty unique item in the franchise. I kind of wish they brought it back. But this character is just so forgettable that I swear that I thought it was just Sarsaparilla all along when I was playing the game. Great Deku Tree, Ocarina of Time. Wise old men are out, wise old trees with the face of an old man are in. Just kidding, he's dead after dungeon number 1. Also, it's after a long lore dump, that is. One that doesn't even tell the full story in regards to what he's explaining. The on-screen dead is nifty at least. Deku Tree Sprout, Ocarina of Time. Wise old trees with the face of an old man are out, baby trees with a face are in. And that means he's not going to spend his entire scene just dumping exposition on us, right? Right? Actually, the developers needed to explain why Link is in the cookery, so they made this horse backstory up on the spot without actually implementing into the greater narrative. That the war happened sometime before the events of the game, and that Link's mom lost her life trying to flee from that war, entrusting Link to a tree with her dying breath. Unfortunately, Link is a faceless protagonist with no personality in this game, so he doesn't even give a shit that his mom died, saving his life. And because he doesn't give a shit, the player has no incentive to give a shit either. And yes, it affects this character's ranking. If you wanted a higher rank, you'd have kept his mouth shut and let us figure it out ourselves, which you probably never would have because there's no evidence this war ever happened. Oru, Twilight Princess. Another boring character. He leads you to the Gerudo Desert, which itself is very hype, but then you get to it and it turns out it's lame like he is. Magutri, Ages, Oracle Games. Look, I'm all for reinterpreting the big tree character as something besides wise old man on the verge of death, but overly attached girlfriend was gimmicky and overbearing. For what it's worth, she's at least more memorable than the season's Magutri. Not that that is a high bar to clear. Great Deku Tree, Wind Waker. Yeah, it's strongly implied that this tree is the same one as the Sprout from Ocarina of Time. Boy, did he not age well. Arguably the ugliest big tree character of all of them. He was often used by Zelda detractors as an example of why this game's art style is terrible. Regardless, as far as the character is concerned, I don't find him to be special, so whatever. Colin, Twilight Princess. Would have been a better character if he had died when he got trampled by King Bulblin's mount or whatever. Instead, he just lives with Neri's scar after a quick recovery, and does nothing else for the rest of the game. Lame. Ilya, Twilight Princess. She does absolutely nothing in gameplay, her story arc is nearly too dramatic for how pointless it is, and her design is very plain compared to how iconic her spiritual predecessors Marion and Melon look. Low tier trash. Paya, Breath of the Wild. Gimmicky cute girl with no backbone and bothersome writing. Does she even have quests now I think about it? I think she had one or two, but they weren't very memorable to me, except for the one that was memorable, and it was memorable for the wrong reason. Gregor, Minish Cap. There is nothing special about this character's personality or background. What is unique about him is that he's haunted by a ghost and passes away by the time you reach him in Cloudtops. That is, unless you do a Kinstone fusion with another completely unrelated character, which opens a portal, which then leads you right to this guy very early on in the game, and then it lets you save him using the Gust Jar. Do all of this, and you get 100 mysterious shells. And then when you meet him later in the game alive, he gives you the light arrows. What? Tingle, Wind Waker. Nintendo advertised this guy just before Wind Waker's release like he was some kind of iconic character of the franchise. And, well, now he kind of is, but back then I feel they really just shoved him down our throats because of the Tingle Shooter nonsense, which was honestly just a cash grab to make you buy a GBA and GameCube the GBA link cable. But dishonest advertisement aside, Tingle is extremely unlikable in this game, charging you outrageous amounts of cash to progress further into the story, and forcing his brother and some random guy into slave labor. Now, despite that these facts alone should be enough to dislike him, I think it's got to do with more than just those things. Fact is, there was quite a bit of raging homophobia at the time of this game's release in America, and his skin-tight outfit with his metrosexual-like posing made him very easy to target. When Nintendo of Japan noticed the disdain, they ensured not a single trace of him was in the next major release, Twilight Princess. And then they never included him in a major release from that point onward. Well, besides his outfit. Before that, they had included him in the Oracle games, the Four Sword games, Minish Cap I think. They even made some games for him exclusively. It's been well over a decade since then, so nowadays people have mellowed out on him. But it's tempting to imagine how different the franchise would be today if this reaction had never happened to begin with, and if he'd had become a mainstay like Impa. Pledge, Skyward Sword. Boring design, and the fact you basically give him supplements so that he can work out better for little reason is a terrible lesson. Like, you can interpret it as making him drink well, I suppose, but those stamina potions explicitly work temporarily. So it's hard to interpret it as anything but drugs, in my opinion. Rosso, A Link Between Worlds. Who? He's supposed to give you something early on before getting turned to a painting, but I swear I only ever first saw him when I rescued him way later into the game. Easily the most forgettable sage. Avil, Majora's Mask. She doesn't look all that different from the other pirates, and you don't have to confront her yourself at any point, so why would I put her any higher than this? Also, she's a pretty incompetent boss. Alfonso, Spirit Tracks. When better, interesting characters are out of commission, Alfonso will take their place. Leave it to me. The Six Maidens, A Link to the Past. Plot devices that you have to rescue, and because rescuing an old man that you don't know is icky, they are all young women that you don't know instead. Yeah, much better. The fact Zelda herself partly shares their fate is sad, because Zelda's escape with you through the sewers at the start of this game is great for making us care about her more than most of the other characters. 5. Skyward Sword. Well, well, if it isn't the sword mouthpiece herself. Used to be that people argued 5 was just as bad as Navi back when Skyward Sword had just released, but nowadays you see people consider it to be far worse than Navi ever was, even though Skyward Sword HD toned 5 down, while Ocarina of Time 3D tuned Navi up. The power of nostalgia. Either way, 5's ultimate crime is being a lackluster successor to the previous major release's partner, Midna, who is very beloved by people for, multitude of reasons. That, and Skyward Sword was quite derided by people who can't stand motion control, so she was among the many scapegoats as to why Skyward Sword is a very bad game that no one should ever enjoy. To be clear, she's not that bad in that sense, but she is definitely underwhelming. Biggest issue I personally have with her is that the few times I did need her help, she didn't have the proper advice ready for me. That, and her going into eternal slumber in the ending, definitely feels unearned. I think she could have worked better if she was silent and mysterious, communicating purely through dance and body language, and with no weird singing. If done correctly, she would still be contrasting her counterpart Girahim, who likes to talk a lot. Speaking of which, I think if she had to be a character that talks, she should have had a human quote-unquote form, like Girahim does. But that requires to delay getting the Master Sword Forbidden plot, or to make her a separate entity that merges with later, or, something like that. It would have been required some major plot changes, so I get why it didn't happen. Goron Elder's son, Majora's Mask. This individual brings up a question hardly anyone ever thought of when playing Ocarina of Time. Do Gorons have ears? I mean, I guess they have to given the situation regarding this character. As for the ranking, well, no one likes crybabies. Yunobo, Breath of the Wild. His personality is a joke based on his ability to be completely invincible. The fact he's a scaredy cat serves to keep him in check, I guess, to show that he's not the type that will ever abuse his power, for better or for worse. Regardless, Yunobo, more like Unobor, Roru, Ocarina of Time. The Sage of Light and the second most boring of all, despite having a fancy design. Besides the various theories about Kibargroa and him, there's little to say here. Gongoron, Phantom Hourglass. I read up on this kid's role in the game, and apparently we can play as him inside a dungeon at some point? It sure as hell beats me because I don't remember anything about this brat when I played Phantom Hourglass myself. Besides him being a brat, of course. Medigron, Ocarina of Time. An incompetent smith who wastes your money on easily breakable versions of the Bigron sword. Not much else to say. Batro, Skyward Sword. I dislike this guy's design, but I do like his team. As for the writing, his whole introduction just screams insensitive. Anuki Island Chief, Phantom Hourglass. I just felt like I had to include this guy as a representative of this unique species, but he's ultimately as generic as they go when it comes to character. Even the sequel doesn't manage to make something interesting out of this race. A shame. Master Carpenter's son, Ocarina of Time. A pessimistic deadbeat that spends all of his time moping under a tree at night in the child timeline. And in the adult timeline, he eventually goes into the Lost Woods and turns into a Stalfos off-screen as part of the trading quest of Ocarina of Time. However, he's apparently the brother of the Cocoa Lady, and he once had a Cocoa named Kojiro, who only ever felt happy enough to crow when it sensed his presence, so I'd say he's not completely irredeemable. Still, I don't really feel bad that he died. Just saying. Ruto, Ocarina of Time. Here she is, the first female Zora ever up until this point, unless the Link's Awakening mermaid is a cousin species or something. Anyway, Ruto's kind of a brat. She figures out something is wrong with Jabu Jabu before everyone else, but then she tries to save him on her own, and then she had this really stupid letter she wrote that you had to directly deliver to her father, despite her explicitly writing for whoever reads the letter to not do that. And when you meet her for the first time, she's portrayed as a tsundere, which is to say she acts like a but secretly likes you because you're the player and you're a 10-year-old heterosexual boy, right? Asks the developers. Unfortunately for Nintendo, most of us weren't fish back then, and it'd take until later before people were better convinced Zoras and Hylians could actually become a legitimate couple in the series' lore. Ruto also forced Nintendo to give female Zoras fancier designs for the following few games because adult Ruto obviously looks like a naked supermodel without nipples in the original. They give her these weird bra scales to compensate this when remodeling her in the 3DS remake and Hyrule Warriors. Anyway, speaking of as an adult, Ruto isn't much better, which is a shame because this was a great opportunity to salvage her like Darina was. Instead, she just kind of shows where you go into the water temple initially and then disappears, literally, forever. Presumably because Nintendo didn't know what to do with her after that. Besides making her awaken as a sage, obviously. She buckles up and calls Sheik a man at some point too, which led to many discussions about Sheik's gender that the game's director had absolutely no interest in answering. Yeah, Ruto's a mess as a character, not a complete train wreck though, as her comments on the Zora Sapphire being a gift from her late mother gives some justification for her behavior as a kid. Shopkeeper, Link's Awakening. Infamous fella right here. Most shopkeepers tend to be behind a desk with their inventory safe from the player's grubby arms. But not this one! If you're quick and astute, you can steal from him once, which you probably will given that he charges 980 rupees for the bow, which you need to beat the game. Besides, everyone calling you thief from that point on is a small price to pay. But going back into the shop will result in you getting hit by the single most powerful attack the franchise has ever seen up until now. Seriously, dude has a spell that just straight up murders you more effectively than any actual villain the franchise can. Well, except perhaps crashing into the moon, into the land, or something like that. Ultimately, though, he's kind of unfun, despite the creativity behind him, so I gotta rank him low. Teba, Breath of the Wild. Who? No, really, we don't get nearly enough time with this guy for how important he is to getting access to a divine beast. The fact his son is the one apparently getting an active role in the sequel means he's not even getting anything in there either. Deku King, Majora's Mask. I have very little to say about this guy. He's not as interesting as his design is, and his arc is as basic as it gets, especially for Majora's Mask. I would really like the Deku Race to get another shot at area representation some other time in the series though. Just don't force a monarchy of sorts onto them, it doesn't really fit them in my opinion. Ralph, Oracle Games. Nearly everyone hates this guy for several reasons, and very few tolerate him. Admittedly, he is a useless idiot, and the reveal of him being related to Queen Ambi feels like an assball, but personally, I think he's a memorable guy at least, and despite everything, I never saw him as directly impeding my progress gameplay-wise. Gore Koron, Twilight Princess. The acting leader of the Gorons, he acts a bit more reasonably compared to Ocarina of Time's Darunia, but like many of Twilight Princess' characters, his design is way lamer. And the rock paper sumo event against him is also not great, if you ask me. Oshus, Phantom Hourglass. Blah, I want to say his story was executed well, but it feels like it was handled incorrectly. These sort of characters work better when surrounded with mystery, I feel, not posing so casually as normal people. Consequently, he's less memorable than the Windfish of Link's Awakening, despite having more screen time. In other words, less is more. Fafor, Oracle Games. Poor Fafor. She was supposed to get a game all to herself according to the rumors about the original scope of the Oracle games, but she was sadly denied one due to how complicated the process would have been. Being little more than a menu for cheats is hardly compensation for it. Jaboon, Wind Waker. Poor Jaboon gets virtually nothing to his nifty design. Not interested in personality though. I hear he was supposed to get a dungeon to himself, but he got cut in development, so his all got destroyed and... Okay, look. It's clear we were going to go inside of him like Jabu Jabu, so if anything, I'd say we dodged a lame-ass dungeon. Gaepora, Skyward Sword. For being Zelda's dad, this guy sure has very little story presence at all. In fact, probably the most memorable thing about him is that you can peek at him while he baits. Not sure why anyone would want to see that, Nintendo. Osfala, A Link Between Worlds. A very typical arrogant character. He ends up very annoying too. Although that's mostly because his actions in the story leave you without a sand rod for most of the game. For what it's worth, he's more memorable to me than most of the other stages in this game at least. Mipha, Breath of the Wild. Mipha's design is honestly just mid, and she's not fun or interesting to listen to. I find out she's better when she's dead and revered by our people as a legend, as any scene with her alive makes her feel far too lame or boring to me. Phonogram Man, Ocarina of Time. Dude breaks the established rules of time travel of the game just so that a player can learn a song. Phonogram Man? More like Paradox Man. King Zora, A Link to the Past. Meeting this absolute genius is really cool at first, and it was the beginning of the Zora species becoming a more friendly race in the franchise as well. But my man charges us 500 rupees for a pretty important piece of equipment though. Not cool. Error, Adventure of Link. Zelda 2 has so many more characters than the first game, yet the one people remember the most is a dude having a midlife crisis. Actually, he's meant to be a programming joke, as there's another character called Bagu, which was mistranslated from Bug, and Error himself is referenced to by a character in a later town as to how to get your way into the Island Palace. This is literally why Error places this favorably, by the way. His infamous line actually has a payoff. Muzu, Breath of the Wild. Why does he have a manta ray for a face? Zora's often changed design, but you have a completely different looking heads in the same installment, in this case sharks and manta rays, it just feels weird. Oh, and as for his character, he's just okay, serves a purpose. Great Fairy, A Link to the Past. She's cursed because of the Dark World, so let's just make her fat because Fat Woman is so funny, right? Ironically, I believe Nintendo will start making the Great Fairies, larger than life, starting with this one right here, culminating in Breath of the Wild's designs. So that's a plus-sized improvement. Seriously though, having to get the plot-important silver arrows from this Great Fairy's hidden cave, which only breaks open through a special bomb that's only sold in the late game it's really lame. She's not nearly as important as she should be considering you need those arrows to finish off Ganon. Eslo, Minish Cap. I gotta be frank, Eslo's mid. His old design just screams gimmicky, as in some executive at a team conference just said, "What if Link's iconic hat could talk?" And then they made Minish Cap around the idea. I give him points for not being another fairy, I guess. His character arc isn't horrible either. Dompe, Ocarina of Time. The first appearance of Dompe the Gravekeeper, whose design and name is reused in a couple of other games. We'll only judge this one's though, as I consider it to be the highlight of his representation. In the child timeline, you can play an annoying game where you have to pay him to dig up various places in the graveyard for treasure, which can take quite a while if Lady Luck isn't on your side. In the adult timeline, you can race as annoying ghost for a plot-relevant item that gets replaced later by an improved one. Not that great of a character now that I think about it. At least visiting this shack is kinda cool if you figure out you can. Isa, Twilight Princess. Memorable design, but I honestly find her business partner more interesting, and said partner is a generic-looking Zora. Stritch, Skyward Sword. One of Groos's goons, a bug man who likes bugs. There's a handful of interactions you can have with him after the intro is completely done, and he even ventures into places I'm not sure you should be able to venture into. Either way, not that bad, not that great. Sahasrara, A Link to the Past. Our first in-game player guide, as far as I can tell. It's, at the very least, Nintendo's first attempt at one. The main role of the guide is to give the player directions on where to go in the open world and narrate for Link, since Nintendo decided at this point he can't ever speak anymore in any game. Lore-wise, this dude's a descendant from the Wise Man and the Elder of Kakariko Village, I believe. But despite that, he mostly loses all importance, and I am using that term loosely here, after you reach the Dark World, which it's only a few optional hints you can get from here and there after that. Besides the ridiculous name, dude isn't very quotable. He isn't what I call an essential part of why A Link to the Past is an amazing game either. Oh, he also kind of appears in the Link Between Worlds too, or one of his descendants or alternate versions or something like that. Either way, it's not too much different better in that game as far as I'm concerned, so it doesn't affect his placement in the rankings. Also, yeah, dude's name just is ridiculously hard to spell or even just remember, seriously. Sararabala, Sarsaparilla, Sarapalin, Ciela, Phantom Hourglass. Everyone seems to forget about this fairy. I can't blame them. She doesn't leave as good of an impression like Linebeck does, and I believe she even argues with him sometimes, which does her no favors due to how much people prefer him. That being said, she's not terrible. Prince Richard, Link's Awakening. One of the many cameo characters in Link's Awakening. This one from a game that was never brought over to, well, anywhere besides Japan. As part of the plot, you have to get 5 golden leaves so that it gives you a key that you need for a dungeon. Simple enough, I guess. Honestly, there's really nothing actually special about him. He's just there to sort of represent all of the cameo characters in Link's Awakening, as they all sort of hang around the same ranking in my opinion. Except Kirby, of course, who is God tier. Fishing Hole Man, Ocarina of Time. Dude hosts one of the most relaxing places in the world, yet we are apparently his only customer ever? In the original, he would actually complain to you if you didn't have a Rumble Pack installed on your controller, which felt like a cheeky in-game advertisement now I think about it, as the Rumble Pack only had to be bought for around $20, I think. But it also needed batteries too, a lot of batteries. And not really worth it given that the controllers afterwards in the next gaming generation came with Rumble as a standard. Well, most of them anyway. Regardless, although you can have some fun with him by stealing his cap in the adult timeline, the fishing hole itself is far more entertaining than he is. Levias, Skyward Sword. Neat design, but this is at least our 3rd space whale introduced in the series, and he doesn't even have much interesting going for him dialogue-wise. And his taste for giant pumpkins also feels like a bit of a joke, which spoils the whole mysterious vibe these sort of characters need to thrive with. Thus, he fails to stand out as much as he could. Zelda, Twilight Princess. Yep, you're seeing this right. Zelda's a side character in Twilight Princess, thanks to, well, the Twilight Princess. It's not the first time she's a side character, but unlike the other times, she's important enough in this game to get mentioned on this list. Anyway, to say she's got a permanent poker face going on here is, quite frankly, another statement. Despite having lost her kingdom to the Twilight and then getting possessed by Ganondorf after sacrificing herself, whatever that means here, to the main character, she shows very little emotion to the aftermath of either being undone. This says a lot about the game that gives us Midna, who shows plenty of emotion the entire journey. I want to give her points for helping out in the horseback segment of the final boss sequence, but Tetra did it better. And Spirit Tracks Zelda does it way better. Agita, Twilight Princess. She 100% did not deserve a character slot in Hyrule Warriors. As a consequence, I find her to be vastly overrated. But ignoring that, I think design and personality-wise, she's just okay. Your Uncle, A Link to the Past. You know how tons of media aimed at young people kill off the protagonist's parents or parental figures early on in the story so that they have to step up and be the hero the writer wants them to be? Yeah, that's Link's uncle right there. Dies literally right after going off on his own to deal with something that was going on in Hyrule Castle. And as far as I remember, it wasn't even an enemy that did him in, it's just he broke his legs after falling down a hole. A little weird considering there's no fall damage yet. Link must have had some attachment to him since he is revived in the ending, which is sort of heartwarming, but not because we care about him for his personality or something like that. It's only because he's our uncle and we should care about family, no matter how nameless they are. Okay, but seriously, this guy accidentally implies in his dying breath that Zelda is your sister, which Nintendo then backpedaled as being misinterpretation of Zelda is your destiny, which is so dumb, because no one talks about vague crap like that when dying. Family talks about family, but they also made this guy our uncle specifically because they didn't want Link to have a family, except he is family anyway, and does anyone smell smoke coming from my head? Running Man, Ocarina of Time. Gotta go fast, gotta go fast. Gotta go faster, 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 faster. No, you can't beat him in a race in the adult timeline. There's no victory screen program in there for you. Even if it takes you less than a second to reach the goal, he'll still beat you by 1 second. No matter how illogical that may be. Pole Collector, Ocarina of Time. What a creepy dude. Or girl? I'm not too sure, but considering you have to find 10 big Poes to get the 4th bottle from them, it's safe to say that this character gets quite an opportunity to leave an impression due to how many times you have to go to them. I believe they also imply they want to do some pretty nasty things with those ghosts too, so, well, make of that what you will. Besides that, they're not that special. Fire, Twilight Princess. Why does this sad clown-faced looking guy has involvement in the main plot? It's not much, but it's quite curious, along with his relationship with Falby, who may have been intended to be a woman and his lover in the beta version of the game. Unfortunately, the final result of this character is just mediocre, I feel. The Bombers, Majora's Mask. Brats that formed a team that once invited a Skull Kid to join them, but then kicked him out for being not a human, I think. In the original, you can play their game of tag as many times as you want and have to do it twice to get their notebook. The second time has to be as normal Link though. But in the 3DS version, the notebook is given to you by this Happy Mask salesman after the first cycle, which unfortunately locks you out of playing with these kids afterwards. To top it all off, because they're part of the plot of the first cycle, the Bombers can't have a varied schedule like most characters do, so they just sorta roam around the whole 3 days non-stop. Makes them pretty boring, honestly. King Zora, Ocarina of Time. A joke left in the game by the developers. Okay, I guess writing-wise he's a caring of dim father who initially dismisses his daughter's plea, only to then worry about her when she goes missing. But besides giving you the Zora tunic if you save him in the adult timeline, there is very little about this guy to like, or hate. He's just there, essentially. It'd be neat if he actually tried doing something for his people. Alright, maybe not. Makar, Wind Waker. Koroks are the lame version of Deku Scrubs. There, I said it. You make a weird, small tree shape, then add a leaf with a face on it. Boom! There, you've got a new Korok. Admittedly, I blame Breath of the Wild for making these guys really generic looking. And as far as Makar himself is concerned, I just legit find him not any more special than the other Koroks, unlike Midley and most of the Rito. So that's why he's a decent bit lower than her. Banker, Majora's Mask. He stamps a special invisible ink on you to keep track of your deposits, which justifies why you can get money from him after turning back the clock in game. But that means you're essentially scamming him out of up to 5,000 rupees as a result. I personally believe he goes out of business on the 4th day because of this. Henna, Twilight Princess. She's only fun when you're mean to her, which is discouraged. So she's just kind of okay. Peatrice, Skyward Sword. It's kind of nifty that they threw us this not quite conventionally appealing woman and told us to break up with her, with an option to even accept her feelings, despite how contrary it is to the plot. Nevertheless, the romance comes across as one-sided and therefore shallow, so it'd be too gimmicky to put her any higher than this. Daruk, Breath of the Wild. I like Daruk's jolly attitude, but his writing leaves a lot to be desired. Him being afraid of dogs is never explored in depth or alluded to, and it just feels like a throwaway gag to make him look weak against something that's otherwise pretty clearly harmless. Talon, Ocarina of Time. A callback to Taron from Link's Awakening. Talon is in theory unchanged character-wise from his inspiration, but in practice it's significantly worse. He seems completely responsible in regards to his daughter, Malon, such as him sleeping near Howell Castle's gates when you're a child, and him just trying to sleep away his days after being kicked out of his ranch by Ingo when you're an adult. That he doesn't even bother to rescue Malon in the latter case is pretty damning especially. Regardless, he does claim he'll work hard after you finish all quests related to him, so he does have that going for him. It's also my understanding that the reason he sleeps so much is due to a bout of depression he got when his wife left him. She might have been in Gerudo, so it's unclear if she's dead or just moved out. So I won't give him too much crap if that's the reason. Although that reason rides on a lot of fan theories. Russell, Twilight Princess. The first character you're introduced to in Twilight Princess, and he gets a bunch of exposition and screen time during the game. Despite all this, he hardly leaves an impression. Probably because the one time he's active in gameplay, it's to hunt you down, and gameplay leaves a much bigger impression than cutscenes. Okay, there's also that scene near the end where him and his group save you from some generic enemies, but that scene just ends up accentuating how the game wasted them, I feel. Colin, Skyward Sword. One of Bruce's goons, a short guy with a bit of a temper, and a hopeless crush on one of the girls. Hitching him with the hand feels like it's supposed to be a cruel joke, yet it is probably the best ending possible for him. Maybe. Mayor de Tour, Majora's Mask. He might be the mayor, but he's bullied by Muto and Captain Vincent for basically 3 days straight unless you intervene. And you'll only be able to intervene at basically the end of the game. What's especially hilarious about it is that Dotor has very direct information regarding Cafe's disappearance if you wear Cafe's mask after helping him. But you have to complete that side quest to even be able to see the dialogue. So the advice only serves to give a connection between him and the Curiosity Shop guy, which is what primarily puts him in this ranking, not gonna lie. Knuckle, Skyward Sword. What is there to say about the Mogmas? I've heard some people are fans of them, but compared to all the other series' staple races, they're just niche. Skyward Sword was pretty terrible in general in designing its new races now that I think about it. None of them are proper towns, just habitats. No one really cares enough to see any of them ever again. Save maybe these guys. As for why I picked Nako, well, he gives us the digging mitts, so I like him a lot better just because of that, especially because these are much better than the Minish Cap as well, too. Giant Turtle, Majora's Mask. Cool design, but comes a bit out of nowhere and isn't all that interesting to speak to. I guess he gives some comforting advice if you have to leave the Great Bay Temple at least. Mallow, Twilight Princess. Meme character, but I like him a lot more than the other brats. It feels like he knows how things really work in the world. Which, given that he looks like a 4-year-old, is probably the whole joke about him. Muto and Vincent, Majora's Mask. These two's main purpose is to represent people of polar opposite ideologies. Muto is so obsessed with tradition that he refuses to acknowledge reality, while Vincent's so stubborn in getting the grant to start forcibly evacuating people that he comes across as a military dictator in training. While Muto has a surprisingly nice talk with Dekulink on the third night, and Vincent ultimately really does care about his soldiers, they're both kinda designed to be disliked, so this is where they stand. Navi, Ocarina of Time. Navi is the most infamous player guide in this series, and probably the first if we ignore Sarasrala from A Link to the Past and Dial from Link's Awakening. She follows you everywhere, tells you to, hey, listen! And even forces you to listen to advice about how to control your character 10 hours into the game, as if you didn't figure it out 10 minutes in, or at least an hour in. But regardless, it's pretty impressive that the Ball of Light can hold your hand so much, isn't it? It's too bad she has no narrative presence in Ocarina of Time, or any game, really. She's just told by the Great Degu Tree to help you on your adventure, and that's it. Lore-wise, Kokoris are supposed to get a fairy companion when they're old enough or something like that, but I firmly believe that was just put into the lore after the developers decided to force Navi onto us, especially given that no other fairy companion does anything in this game, and in the Wind Waker, the Koroks there have no fairy companions. Sheesh! And Navi randomly leaves you at the end of the game, and then Link walks away from the windows left through, so I think, man, they part ways after accomplishing their destiny. Good for them! Except, no! In Majora's Mask, Link's implied to be looking for her bright blue ass, which means she ditched Link for some unexplained reason, which I will not try to figure out because, again, she's really just the developer's way to hold a player's hand in this vast new 3-dimensional world back in 1998. Had she been given a proper reason to be involved in the plot, had an actual personality, and been less forceful with her advice, she would have been much higher in these rankings. But alas, that is not the case. Oh, by the way, she's a little worse in the 3DS version of the game because of the incessant need to tell you to take a break. Damn it, Nintendo, just let me play for 8 hours straight like I want to. Queen Ambi, Oracle Games. Honestly, she's just okay. Her design is fitting enough for what it is, and her connection to the skeleton pirate is surprisingly cute. But beyond that, she doesn't get to do much due to the whole possession bit. Jolene, Phantom Hourglass. She seeks Linebeck over some pretty legitimate grievances, and you have to essentially stave her off by fighting her every time you encounter her. A bit too gimmicky, although I do like that on the final match, it is revealed she knew Linebeck was hiding inside the crate in the room all along. Sakon, Majora's Mask. In a series where slashing your sword all over the place, letting bombs explode everywhere, and firing arrows directly into someone's head won't damage most NPCs, the fact you have the opportunity to straight up murder this guy says a lot about what Nintendo thought of him. Mido, Ocarina of Time. Proto-Goose, as I like to call him. Mido, or Mido, I'm not sure how to say it, is presented as your childhood bully, and as essentially the first obstacle you have to overcome, which you do after getting a sword and a shield that lets you easily beat him up. Makes him really feel like a plot device meant to appeal to bully nerds now that I think about it. That being said, when he does something similar in the adult timeline to protect Saria, and you convince him to get out of the way, He seems to faintly believe you're similar to the kid he used to bully, since Kokiri don't age and Mido never realized you weren't a Kokiri. Must have thought we just died when we left the woods. Gives him a little bit of character, at least. Orca, Wind Waker. Okay as a character, but I hate his stupid challenge minigame. It exposes how flawed the game's combat is. The Owl, Link's Awakening. The series' first plot device owl, knows more than you do, speaks like he read the entire script of the story beforehand, and expects you to listen along even though you probably just bought the game to stab at stuff and solve puzzles or something, having fun besides listening to this moron. Not that he's a moron, he's actually solid enough lore-wise, I guess. Just, he's weak narratively, that's the problem. In fact, I think I would say the game would improve without him, as it will make the plot twist harder to see coming into the process. Kaipora Gaibora, or whatever his name is. Okay, enough time. The series' second plot device owl, easily the most infamous of them, due to having long-winded speeches and lore dumps that you are very likely to repeat several times because the first time you're playing the game, you're mashing A without actually noticing that you're telling him to repeat yourself. And even when you do notice, it's still easy to accidentally tell him to repeat himself. And even when you do notice, it's still easy to accidentally tell him to repeat himself. And even when you do notice, it's still easy to accidentally tell him to repeat himself. Also, much like Navi, he's a player guide for the early game, since Navi can't know everything about everything when it comes to the plot, now can she? So why does this owl know everything? Well, there's implications that he's connected to the Sage of Light, Roru. I can't remember if it's because he is Roru though, or it's just his pet. Doesn't really justify it talking like it read the game script ahead of time, but whatever. Either way, you generally don't like seeing him ahead of you, but there's a few cases where he can help you get out of an area quickly through a ride a la Super Mario 64 hang gliding, kind of. So he's a little more useful and interesting than Navi in my opinion. Shad, Twilight Princess. Shad has a surprising amount of lines in the second half of the game, but all of it feels like background noise given his eventual irrelevance to the plot. The fact you have to shoo him out of the way when you need to teleport a giant cannon out of the cave feels like the developers just killing the potential fun scene with him. Ashay, Twilight Princess. Another boring character. Okay, in Ashay's case, she seems like she should be stoked by design, so I won't admonish her for looking and sounding bored as much as it did with Oru. She sadly does nothing in-game besides informing you to get a stinky fish's smell so that you can find your way into the Snow Peak area. Kokoto, Nico, and Tetris Pirate Crew. Wind Waker. I'm using Nico as a substitute for Tetra's entire pirate crew, because ultimately I feel he's the best out of them. They all have varied personalities, but bullying Nico twice by showing off how confident you are compared to him feels really good. That being said, not that great of a character. Any of them. I know some of them have little secrets and some minor debt, but the problem is that it's not really used in game for anything, so it ends up being pointless. Kaipora Gaibora, Majora's Mask. The series' third plot device owl and easily the most mysterious one. He appears a grand total of 2 times and then essentially disappears forever from all time loops with no real explanation. Unlike Ocarina's version, this one makes use of both times to help you get something. In the first case to get your best method of fast travel, the Song of Soaring. In the second case to get the Lens of Truth, which, well, it helps newcomers get the Goron Mask at least. As a character, I feel he wasn't used nearly enough. He could have appeared in Great Bay and Iguana Valley once as well, like to guide you to Miko's body, or to be the one who asks you for the Garo's mask at the valley entrance. Of course, I feel he could have just been removed entirely and replaced by other characters for his appearances as well. Essentially, he's in this middle ground where he doesn't appear enough to justify his presence, but he also doesn't appear so little that I want to remove him entirely. Coco Lady, Ocarina of Time. Imagine working with animals that give you an allergic reaction if you touch them. That's Coco Lady. This screw-up of a chicken handler can't keep her hands in the pan in the child timeline no matter how many times you help her. At the very least, she gives you a useful reward for helping her the first time, and, well, it's all fun to throw those Cocos out of the pan after putting them all in. In the adult timeline, she got her act together and bred a Coco that doesn't give her a rash, so that's some nice development for her. Also, yes, her name is indeed Coco Lady. She's not to be confused with Anju, who we will see much later. Revali, Breath of the Wild. That ain't Falco. Actually, nah, this is pretty much just Falco character-wise. I want to say I like him, but Revali has little chemistry with the other champions in the original game, I feel, while Falco had plenty of fun banter with his crewmates to begin with. That being said, Revali not apparently being part of a sacred noble bloodline does make him more inspiring compared to the other champions, so he at least has that going for him. Old Woman, or Impa, The Legend of Zelda. The counterpart of the old man. This one's not nearly as memorable due to her lines as just not being as quotable as his are. Still, unlike him, she sort of has a name, and as far as I remember, her lines usually aren't as incomprehensible as the old man's are, so she isn't that much different from him in quality as far as I'm concerned. Soldier that dies in the back alley. Ocarina of Time. Yeah, I think I just had to include this one due to how crazy Nintendo was for having a man die on screen in their E10 plus rated game. But he sure exists and is the most soldier of all time. He found out about Ganondorf's scheme to overthrow the king, but... Okay, look. By the time we find this man, we already know in game what Ganondorf's trying to do. So his intel just kind of isn't shocking to hear. Still, he's cool. And dead. Old Man, The Legend of Zelda. Easily the most memorable character from the first game. Dude's many singular lines of dialogue are forever etched into the fandom's mind, and are even still quoted to this day in multiple forms of media, or at least by old fans like myself. That being said, if you attack him, he sometimes attacks back, which is good and interesting, but as far as I know, you can't beat him. Ever. Which begs the question why Nintendo bothered letting us stab him in the first place. I place him here just because of that, and the fact that most of his lines are incomprehensible gibberish. Flute Boy, A Link to the Past. Flute Boy ghosts us the moment we approach him. I don't believe he even has any lines, at least in the light world, but just a few seconds you get to see of him is more than enough to say everything about his character. Also, the mystery surrounding him is great the first time you play the game, and the quest to get the flute he somehow hid underground is quite memorable. Madame Aroma, Majora's Mask. You can tell this character is Majora's Mask exclusive compared to most others. Not even Zelda looks this striking, and she's a princess! In terms of personality though, she's actually not that special. While she is kind-hearted for the most part, she confuses the player for a detective she hired, and forgets to update the postman's schedule to let him flee. Granted, given she's an important person and her husband is swamped with officials himself, it probably just slipped her mind. Or she assumed he'd defy the orders. Either way, I can't put her any higher than this. And she's mostly carried by her design and her interesting decision to just drink at the bar in the final night instead of fleeing. Quill, Wind Waker. He's cool looking and helps you multiple times during the game, but he's not that interesting, I feel. Impa, Ocarina of Time. The first named Impa to actually appear in game. She's got some neat things to her. Like being a Sheikah who uses Deku Nuts to disappear from her sight is actually kinda cool given how they work when you use them. But after Ganondorf chases Zelda and her out of a Hyrule Castle, you never see her again until you beat the Shadow Temple, where she then awakens as a sage, and by then, I wouldn't be surprised if you forgot all about her. She is mentioned to have gone off to seal the creatures that escaped the well just beforehand in one scene at least. Ultimately though, Impa does little gameplay-wise, besides teaching you Zelda's lullaby and guiding you out of Hyrule Castle. And her narrative presence in the story is also really small, so I can't place her any higher than this. Horo, Twilight Princess. Honestly, I just think he's neat, and his early game interactions are very cozy. His pet bird Thrill is also fun to tease, and to die to. Gondo, Skyward Sword. Not really great writing-wise, but I like his design and attitude, and you visit him quite a few times on a casual run for the upgraded equipment, so I appreciate that. Beetle, Wind Waker. What a memorable shopkeeper. Even if it's a letdown on some aspects, it's hard to stay angry at him, I feel. Plus, he's now a mainstay, mostly. Uku, Twilight Princess. My favorite freak of nature. Make it go away, please. Maple, Oracle Games. A simple witch with a fun gimmick. I've always liked her a lot, but in hindsight it's mostly because nearly every time she appears in game, it's an opportunity to stack most of her money and goods. Character and design wise, she's not that great. That being said, it's a really cool touch that she upgrades her equipment depending on how many encounters you've had with her, or if you're on a linked game. Tal, Majora's Mask. A male fairy?
This is illegal, you know.
Unlike Tattle, Tal's kind of underdeveloped. He's much nicer to his sister to contrast her. Except he was also very much complicit in Skull Kid's criminal actions, so it feels more like he's just Skull Kid's #1 simp. Essentially, he's timid and naive. That being said, I don't understand how he knows all about the giants, but Tattle doesn't. I mean, you'd think he'd have told his sister earlier about the Skull Kid's other friends, but nope. Master Swordsman, Majora's Mask. I don't often include generic characters, but I have to make an exception for this guy. Not because of his personality, but rather because he just kind of shows how much of a mechanical advantage the game Majora's Mask has over the other games in the series. In other games, you'd only have to make one paragraph of dialogue at most for this kind of guy, but because of Majora's Mask time system and mask mechanic, you'd have to create a truckload more dialogue, like 10 times as much. Mask reactions are fine and dandy, but where this guy really shines is his dialogue on the final day. He proclaims he'll cut the moon to pieces at midnight, but lets you train with him until 11 PM. After 11 PM, he kicks you out to say he needs to meditate in preparation for his moon cutting, I suppose. But if you come back inside at midnight, it just says he left. Now, if you're a Deku, like you're stuck as one in the first cycle, that's pretty much as far as you go with him. But if you've got access to your sword, you can go to the back of his dojo by cutting the wood blocking the storage room, only to find him in there, terrified of his impending doom. Not only did they go all out for this petty, arrogant man, But it's important to note that this sort of work isn't possible to be put into other characters, because in other games without a time loop mechanic, he'd have to be available for his training minigame from start to finish since, he's got a collectible you can get for acing it. This failure state that characters can be left in really is exclusive to Majora's Mask, which is a pretty unparalleled advantage when it comes to making characters feel more realistic and three-dimensional. Here, screwing up a side quest doesn't always mean you can just try again right away. You literally have to turn back the clock for another chance. What I'm saying is that if you think there's an unusual amount of Majora's Mask characters in the higher rankings, that's not bias. Majora's Mask mechanics just naturally enhances characters. It's just that good. Naru and Din, Oracle Games. Do people seriously contest which of these two is better than the other solely because of them being exclusive to a version? Yeah, they probably do. That being said, I find that they're both somewhat equal. I want to say I like Din more, but she spends nearly the full adventure in distress, while Naru at least manages to stop being a liability midway through. And honestly, deep down I like Naru as much as Din. WhiteHawke got screwed hard, man. Goron Elder, Majora's Mask. Crazy that this Goron is supposed to take care of Snowhead's problem all by himself. He ends up in a giant snowball and or frozen solid when you find him, although where you do so depends on the day, for some reason. I hardly have anything else to say about him, although the fact he is immensely disappointed he can't remember the full Goron's lullaby when trying to teach it to you, only for it to turn out he was short 2 notes, is very funny to think about. Valoo, Wind Waker. His design might make him look a bit comical, but it makes him very memorable too. A pity he can't really get much of his personality in the few scenes he speaks. Yes, even with the translated runes, he doesn't exude that much charisma. Irene, A Link Between Worlds. Hey, it's Maple again, but Capcom did get a hand on her design this time. Probably the most likable of the sages of this game, largely because her disappearance is far more noticeable than the others since her broom feels very lonely without her on it. Terran, Link's Awakening. Marin's dad has a decent amount of presence in the narrative, like when he gets into trouble really on by getting turned into a raccoon by eating a wild mushroom, or when he gets into trouble by harassing some bees with a stick, or... Yeah, this guy's a bumbling moron, with a good heart, mind you. If natural selection was more prevalent to these games, though, he'd totally die to an early game enemy. Toto, Majora's Mask. Why did I include this guy here? He's got a side quest with Gorman that gets you the circus leader's mask, but other than that, not much else. Well, I guess it's because I've got a bit of a soft spot for his design and writing personally. He's essentially the first 3D Zora I ever saw, and before I got to Great Bay, I was enamored with the idea of what Zora culture could be like back then. I especially like this saying, "Are the fins damp lately?" as it added to Zora culture quite a bit, even though no other Zora ever says that. I won't give him a higher ranking because of that, but I felt it was right to share with you all how some inconspicuous minor characters can still be very interesting to some players. Deku Princess, Majora's Mask. More entertaining to interact with than her father, especially because of the whole carrying her in a bottle shtick you do with her. That being said, she has essentially the same backstory as Ruto from Ocarina of Time does, and our interactions with her are somewhat limited after her rescue, so this is as high as I can place her. Also, she's entirely optional, and the reason I know this is because I accidentally ignored her the very first time I played Majora's Mask. I, couldn't see the cuttable vine door due to the low brightness of my TV. Whoops! Gorman's Brothers, Majora's Mask. For some reason, Nintendo decided to make 3 versions of Ingo in Majora's Mask. While the middle brother Gorman is a pretty good character, these two are a little more in line with the original in terms of depth. In fact, they're probably even more shallow to some extent. Nevertheless, they do have some oddities, like for some reason they have several Garro's masks, a third of which they give to you if you race them across their track once in Wind, which is essential for plot progression. There's a theory this mask was originally Gorman's, but, well, I think the developers just wanted to give Epona something else to do. The 3DS version gives them a little bit of extra depth, most notably by making it seem as if they genuinely think milk is good when filled with grass, worms, and who knows what else. Maybe that's why they steal Krima's milk by spilling it across their field. Gabora and Zubroa, Majora's Mask. I like their dynamic and designs, and the gilded sword they forged for you is awesome. Additionally, Zubroa lets you sell him gold dust if you keep winning on the Goron races for whatever reason, even though 40 rupees isn't quite worth it compared to the 200 the Curiosity Shop gives you. Although the Curiosity Shop is only open late at night, so it balances out a bit. Bigoron, Ocarina of Time. An absolute unit. I always felt impressed that Nintendo made this friendly giant so early on in 3D gaming, even though his animations are pretty clearly not made for his size. At least his voice sounds like it booms across the entire mountain, for better or for worse. Anyway, forges you the Bigoron sword at the end of the trading quest, which lets you easily cheese Dark Link and Ganon. Not that they're particularly tough. The Four Giants, Majora's Mask. Excellent presentation style. Keeping their dialogue nearly unintelligible to the player keeps them mysterious, and their eerie scene further helps makes them strange and alien-like. It's too bad their design is kinda goofy. Not ill-fitting, but not ideal either. It could have been better, is what I'm saying. Rosa, Oracle Games. I can't be the only person here who wants the Subrogans to come back, right? Right? Anyway, Rosa's a nifty callback to Marin, sort of, but she trades depth for comedy for the most part. Still a very fun time with her, though. Impa, Breath of the Wild. Not too bad for an old woman version of Impa. She is essentially just there to do lore jobs on us, though. We never even have to meet her to beat the game, although we do need to do so to get a true ending, I believe. Salvatore, Wind Waker. Shopkeepers' personalities tend to be sploosh, but when it comes to Salvatore, it's a kaboom! Renado, Twilight Princess. Oh, would you look at that, another boring Twilight Princess character. What are the odds? Actually, Renado's pretty good. He's calm and composed, and that's expected of him as the leader of Kakariko. Telma almost manages to fluster him too, which is a great character interaction that we do not often see in this series. Naboru, Ocarina of Time. What a late bloomer. You only meet Naboru in what is possibly the last non-final dungeon you'll tackle in the game, yet she still manages to leave quite an impression on players despite that, and it's all thanks to having some nifty dialogue and scenes. The fact she turns out to be a sage is a total cop-out though. She was brainwashed for who knows how long, then as soon as you're finished dealing with Coom and Kotick, she awakens like it was nothing. Feels like they just had to throw someone in there, if you ask me. Tingle, Majora's Mask. Well, well, if it isn't the wannabe fairy himself. In this game, he actually doesn't quite stand out that much compared to the other characters, and perhaps more importantly, he's actually someone you look forward to finding in some areas since he's the one who sells maps. At a reasonable price, no less. That being said, his behavior can still come across as overly strange, even in games such as this. Dimitri, Moosh, and Ricky, Oracle Games. Dimitri, Moosh, and Ricky are 3 animal friends you can temporarily play as, and you even befriend one depending on your save file too, so that you can use them as you please. It's a pretty cool idea that was never really revisited ever again, unfortunately. Honestly, Epona's neat and all, but I'm up for talking steeds in future Zelda games. I always end up with Moosh though. Not that I dislike him, but Ricky's got boxing gloves, man. Ingo, Ocarina of Time. The Luigi to Talon, though they aren't brothers. Rightfully complains about Talon's laziness, but he hardly says anything about Malin, who probably works even harder than he does when she is forced into his position. In the adult timeline, he falls under Ganondorf's sway and overthrows Talon to then train a horse as an offering to him, even though Ganondorf already has a horse. The player usually ends up stealing an opponent away from him, after which Malin takes back control of the farm and Ingo repents his way. This sounds like a decent story arc, but Ingo's attitude after the quest is over just seems like he's trying to pretend he never did anything to Malin or the horses, which she implies he's physically abused during his reign, so the fact he essentially gets off scot-free feels unsatisfying. He really could have benefited from NPC to NPC dialogue, but the franchise hadn't quite gone there yet. Also, he's a sore loser that's fun to put in this place. Darunia, Ocarina of Time. The first prominent Goron character, Darunia's first impression is pretty weak all things considered. He locks himself in his own room because the King of Hyrule refuses to send anyone to him, and when you show up, he gets pissed off because you're a kid. Then you play him a catchy song, and he dances like he's never danced before, as you solve his food shortage problem by yourself, after giving you a bracelet, and then calls you his brother afterwards. Well, all the Gorons do, but details. He's better in the adult timeline. There, he named his son after you, which is very touching all things considered. Then he tries to rescue his people from the fire temple, but when you show up, he shifts his plan and decides to personally deal with the boss of the temple, Volvagia, while you go rescue his people instead. He dies in the attempt, but that's okay, because turns out he's a sage, and awakening as a sage means you kinda don't need to be alive to keep existing? Honestly, it's kinda hard to tell if the sages are dead or alive. Better not think too much about it, because I doubt Nintendo did. Coom and Kotick, Majora's Mask. Twin Merva's unfused elements weren't qualified for this list in Ocarina of Time, but in Majora's Mask they're fully qualifiable and honestly, better than they have any right to be. Coom is injured and in need of help at the start of a cycle, where after you rescue her, you get to ride the boat around the swamp and then play a game with her once the dungeon's cleared. Kotick, on the other hand, tends to restore normally on the first day, but if you haven't rescued Coom from the second day onwards, she'll leave her shop to search for her. It's a super cool touch that game designers didn't have to do, but thanks to it, it makes Kotick and Coom seem like they care far more for each other than whatever the hell the bosses from Ocarina of Time were trying to do in their boss fight. Queen Rutella, Twilight Princess. How the hell does this dead woman accomplish so much in-game? I wasn't going to rate her, but upon reflection, she's strangely competent despite her ghastly state, guiding you to save her people and son and then leading you to the Zora armor. And this also makes her sacrifice for her people more poignant, I feel. At your service, my liege. And Jean, Spirit Tracks. A pretty composed and well-written character. She mostly works by playing off others, though, like Zelda and Burn. Her, departure in the end feels like it completes her too, if that makes any sense. King Rome Bosphoramus Hyrule, Breath of the Wild. Bad dad wants to make up for being bad long after the consequences of his actions have ruined his kingdom. Okay, I joke, but that does technically sum it up. For what it's worth, he works really well in the Great Plateau. It's just that he's a total douche in that one flashback, which I have to assume he was like that for years towards Zelda. Sharp and flat, Ocarina of Time. We've got a duo here. Fact is, there's really no way I can place these two in a separate ranking. At least in this game's case. Only way you can meet them is if you disturb their graves near the royal family's tomb, and the lore behind them is actually striking if you listen carefully to what they have to say. Also gives an explanation over why the sun's song affects time when used by, well, I want to say the Ocarina of Time, but it also works with the Fairy Ocarina too. So it's just a sun song that does the magic by itself, regardless of the instrument used to play it. It's quite a pity, given that one of the problems with the Ocarina of Time in Ocarina of Time is that it doesn't actually have any exclusive songs that allow it to manipulate time, even though it has a song explicitly called the Song of Time. Good thing the sequel remedied this. Evan, Tijo, and Japas, Choice Mask. Despite their differences, I find these three all hang on the exact same tier due to how equal their representation is. Evan's the leader of the Indiegogo's and a bit of an arrogant dude. However, I do believe that he is charismatic enough to pass off as a leader, especially since he has no qualms stealing songs from other people to keep up his career as a composer. Japas is a chill guy who just loves to jam, but also worries for the rest of the crew. Tijo, meanwhile, has more wisdom than expected, and just loves to gossip when given the opportunity. You also get a good deal more insight into Miko's personality by talking to all three, so a pretty good gang of NPCs for sure. Thelma, Twilight Princess. Pretty unique design for her character, and she's expressive and open about her feelings. Her and her cat are also a reference to Thelma and Louise, which is a very unexpected cut from this franchise. Overall, pretty good and memorable. Yeto, Twilight Princess. A fun, goofy character with a memorable design, which is a very ill-fitting combination for Twilight Princess's usual character ilk. Racing him and his wife on the sled also feels great despite the loose controls. Ravio, A Link Between Worlds. This is supposed to be a cowardly version of Link, but he comes across as a conniving merchant if anything, ready to swindle you out of your money through his business methods. That is, unless you're competent enough to not die, in which case he just seems like a terrible merchant, who we take all of his stock for cheap. The Ravio we see in the ending might as well be a different character, by the way. Not that it was impossible to connect the dots, just because of this game's progression style, it feels very disjointed to go from goofy merchant to cowardly hero. That aside, pretty good design and character. Linebeck, Phantom Hourglass. This is pretty much the sole character portrayal people like about Phantom Hourglass, and I can't blame them given how much development he has given. It truly feels like he earned his story arc by the ending. I'll bet it doesn't feel extremely interesting due to how underdeveloped everyone else ends up being compared to him. The Q Butler, Majora's Mask. For a character that could have easily been just a 10-second sideshow attraction, he's got a notoriously difficult minigame race and a surprisingly tragic connection to the Deculink. Let's just say that putting the father mourning his dead child at the end of the credits sequence that otherwise showed everyone else being happy was a pretty ballsy move from Nintendo. Curiosity Shop Guy, Majora's Mask. Why couldn't this guy get a name? He's actually a pretty important link between several characters in Clock Town. He also tends to the trading post during the day and the curiosity shop at night, which is really a black market when you think about it. That being said, although this guy is scum, he still has standards and friends, and he's even kind of based. For instance, in a secret scene on the second night at midnight, he actually managed to buy off the big bomb bag from Sakon at a measly 50 rupees. And then sends Cafe after him thanks to the little spy hole he installed inside the back room of the place. He also gives you the priority mail and key and mask if you somehow figure out that you can visit the back room on the third day. And only in the afternoon, the original version. Now, that being said, he's also the guy you have to see to get your stolen items back if you fail to deal with the Takuri properly, which is kind of uncool. What's even more uncool though is that he'll buy the Zora eggs off you if you try to sell them to him. Like, yeah, I'm offering, but you're not supposed to accept, man! Kamali, Wind Waker. He's a somewhat understandable character with a decent arc. It's actually really nice that he's flying just out of the blue in the second half of the game too. That being said, first impressions last and it's hard to see him as more than a spoiled brat despite his growth. I wish he had actually helped in a dungeon of sorts. That would have really helped him shed his earlier portrayal. Lulu, Majora's Mask. Poor woman's mute until you sing her a song that indicates her children are born and safe. Well, at least in one timeline they were born and safe. Nintendo didn't even bother trying to implement her for the Great Bay Temple beyond awakening the turtle that leads you into it, which is, fair, honestly. There's some dialogue that seems to indicate that she wasn't too sure about her life choices up until now, which to me indicates she was mute largely due to a midlife crisis. Glad we can get her past it, just don't tell her Miko is actually really dead. Flat, Majora's Mask. Him and Sharp share the same rank in Ocarina of Time, but in Majora's Mask, they're quite a bit more developed and different, so they get a different and better rank. Flat's final request for you to save his brother comes across as extremely classical from a cinematic perspective, and often most players won't even understand the seriousness of his request, or how plot important it is given that you need it to continue. Regardless, I put him up this high largely because I have a very soft spot for him. Impa, Skyward Sword. Possibly the best version of Impa, although not because of her writing, but mostly because of her design and implementation. The fact they managed to include both the young and old versions of the character in the same game is impressive. Although they spent far too much time acting like we can't connect the dots and realize they're the same character before the big reveal. As for her writing, her low point in particular is when she chastises the player unreasonably in the second dungeon. Although I guess they knew that, given that you can get back at her in the third one. Postman, Majora's Mask. What a professional dude. So obsessed with following his schedule that he can't bring himself to defy it, even though he very clearly wants to do so for his own safety. It's actually quite interesting to see that this guy is more than meets the eye, because if you never go to the postman's office, he really just seems like a generic character designed to just check the mailboxes on a schedule. The fact you can ignore his flight and deliver the priority mail yourself, or give it to the hand in the toilet, feels like a pretty mean joke from the developers. Oh, you can also play a game to count to exactly 10 with him for some reason. The bunnyhood solves if you're not capable of getting the timing down. King Dorephan, Breath of the Wild. Oh my god. Finally a good King Zora and he still gets to be an absolute unit? Hallelujah! Besides the wise dialogue with him, there's some cool lore surrounding some of his actions in the story, which makes him all the greater. Absolutely a fantastic new entry. Errol, Wind Waker. What an adorable idea! Let's actually give the player some real family while playing this game, which therefore means Link gets to have a personality for once due to having some people that can care about, and having a background that isn't is ignored like in Ocarina of Time's bullshit backstory or Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword's cliched teenage romance arcs. Sadly, she ends up underused due to being kidnapped early in the game, and even when you do rescue her in the middle of the game, she just ends up safe inside Tetra's ships which you never have access to again, which means you never get to see her again until the ending. Lame. Fortunately, you get to talk to her for a bit, so it's not a total loss. Princess Hilda, A Link Between Worlds. I like to think of Hilda as a what-if version of Zelda that actually had to do stuff for her people by herself, without a hero. And not in the boring Twilight Princess way either. In this case, Hilda's not so much evil as she is desperate, due to her realm having lost its Triforce. Thus, her desire to take the Hyrulean Triforce is largely because she seeks to save her kingdom, not because she wants to destroy the world or be a tyrant or something dumb like that. No matter what, despite her apparent betrayal, I can't help but feel happy when her plea is finally answered in the ending. Tattle, Majora's Mask. I might be in the minority in this one, but finally, a good f***ing partner. Unlike Navi, Tattle actually has a good reason to join you, namely to find her brother and Skull Kid, and that she can open doors. And she also actually has a personality, which is that of a bitch. Okay, yes, that's a pretty harsh way to put it, but she definitely mocks you if you ask for advice for some of the enemies that got brought over from Ocarina of Time, especially in the original version of the game. There's also the fact that the entire reason she got separated from her brother was because she was trying to keep you down after you got turned into a Deku Scrub, which was, well, it probably didn't leave a good first impression to most people. She does eventually apologize about it after you clear the first dungeon, finds the courage to go to the final dungeon with you, and then warms up to you by the ending for having helped her out until the end. Bottom line is, she actually has character development, unlike Navi. Besides that, she speaks for Link in some scenes, which is pretty standard stuff for partners. Hero's Spirit, Twilight Princess. This is supposed to be Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask Link after turning into some kind of Stalfos after having searched for his lost friend for a bit too long, thanks Navi. Except he teaches us moves that are never used in those games, so his whole backstory feels thoroughly informed. Also, with the exception of the first move, they don't even matter in the long run. But, ignoring those tidbits, he's a very cool character, and I always want to get a new move from him when I can. Marin, Link's Awakening. This is probably one of the first characters that has a great story arc that progresses through the game. Marin's wish for a life away from the Isle often resonates with the player's attempt to leave it, and she spends a good deal of time with you in the plot for several reasons. There's even a bunch of little extra moments you can get when she's following you in the later versions of the game, such as by repeatedly harming a Cuckoo, or having her fall down on you by jumping down the well. Some stuff is a little informed though. Like, the developers clearly wanted her to be the Zelda of Link's Awakening, and the game even mentions she looks like her. Except I don't think anyone would mistake Marin for Zelda ever, given their vastly different hair color and outfits. They also probably intended for her to be a pseudo kind of love interest by having you rescue her at some point, which could have been really detrimental to the plot and her character if they had followed through on it. Regardless, she's definitely a great character at a time when the franchise still didn't let NPCs talk with each other, barring some minor exceptions. Sharp, Majora's Mask. Sharp is significantly more intimidating than Majora's Mask, possessing a song that literally kills you as time passes if you do nothing to stop him from doing it. And you might not even have the tool to stop him if you haven't met his brother yet. The fact he has a special response for you using the Song of Healing on him is really good, by the way. It sets up a crucial difference in its function that otherwise wouldn't exist. Just in time too, given that you have to use it shortly thereafter on someone who does need it. Saria, Ocarina of Time. Out of all the Kokiri, the Kokiri. Saria is presented as the player's only childhood friend, and the one who speaks to them more than the others do, which is decently represented in game. You even bond with her on occasion, and once she teaches you her very catchy song, you can talk to her for advice on what to do next, which would be great if Navi and the Owl didn't already exist. Speaking of which, the fact you have to replace her parting gift for the Ocarina of Time is lame as fi. Feels like she could have been so much better if it wasn't for those few narrative flaws. Oh yeah, she's a sage too, but that really doesn't change much in her case. Malon, Ocarina of Time. The definitive cute farm girl. Actually, no, despite being memorable, I don't think Malon's actually that popular, but she definitely is to me at least. You first meet her in Hyrule Castle where she assists you to wake her lazy father who is in the way of your progress, and then she leaves for Lon Lon Ranch, where she is basically optional from then on in. But given that nearly all players feel compelled to see her again, I think she was introduced really well. She teaches you an iconic song as a child, but there's no real payoff to it until you're an adult, where it then becomes crucial for riding Epona. Also, there's some extra depth to her if you meet her at night before rescuing her in the adult timeline, as she copes with the situation by singing her song and thoughts, all alone. But after that, she largely becomes static as someone who simply lets you keep testing your skill with the horse tank controls in the minigame. There are some minor implications that she marries Link after the game because of Twilight Princess, but that's largely speculation. What most people forget is that she's supposed to be a callback to Marion from Link's Awakening. But that hardly matters to most people since not everyone played Link's Awakening. They should. Urbosa, Breath of the Wild. Out of the 4 champions, arguably the best one. Striking silhouette, cool personality, good chemistry with the others, and great ability. What's not to love? Well, I suppose we could nitpick the nature of her design or something, but honestly, I like that she looks like she can crush a watermelon by just flexing a bit. Romani, Majora's Mask. One of the most must protect that smile characters of Majora's Mask. Seriously, once I found out what happens to her if you do nothing on the first day, I make a point to always kick Dem's asses every single loop, no matter how pointless it may be. She's also got some pretty varied and cute dialogue if you wear some masks, as well as a heart-wrenching discussion with her older sister on the 3rd night. So, yeah, pretty damn good. I just wish that design-wise she wasn't so transparently just young Malon. Daphnes no Hansen Hyrule, Wind Waker. Great name and pretty great character depiction too. Ocarina of Time and A Link to the Past's Kings basically just died off screen, but this guy challenges that by getting himself involved into the story. As a boat. Also, he's technically dead too, maybe? I don't remember why this guy basically exists as he is, now that I think about it. Either way, his resolution to let Link and Zelda find their own new land while staying behind as Hyrule sinks into the sea forever is still touching to this day. Let's just ignore for a moment that the new land Link and Zelda found ended up being called Hyrule too. Riju, Breath of the Wild. Riju's so great. She acts perfectly like a chief when she needs to act as one despite being so short, but if you look into her own personal life, you can see she's still young at heart. Her Divine Beast segment is also unique and very fun, although very easy to cheese like most things too. Kafei, Majora's Mask. This Pipsqueak is actually a full-grown man who was cursed to look like he currently does for no other reason than the Skull Kid find it funny. And the developers wanted to reuse some of Link's animations on him. He's supposed to marry someone on the day of the festival, but while he was turned into a pipsqueak, the thief Sakon stole his wedding ceremony mask. The mask is basically the equivalent of a wedding ring in this world, which to Kafei meant that he couldn't show himself to his betrothed until he got the mask back, which is way easier said than done. That thief has a fully automated security system protecting his loot in a time period where technology still seems to be at a renaissance level at most. Seriously, people complain about the ghosts being out of place, but hardly anyone complains about this dude's technology level? Ugh. Now, as long as you don't bungle up by stopping the thief's actions in the first night, you'll be able to assist Kafei to get his mask back on the 3rd night. But the catch here is that if you don't convince his lover to wait for him, then he'll arrive back to town just in time to simply get crushed by the moon. That's why you have to help him properly convince his lover to stay and wait for him, so that he can arrive back to the town just in time to exchange his mask with hers, and then get crushed by the moon. Anyway, Kafei is somewhat unique in that he's one of the very first characters besides Link that is playable, even though it's very brief. The others being the boy and girl avatars from the defunct Satilla View games, but I'm not sure if anyone counts those two. Gorman, Majora's Mask. What if we took Ingo from Ocarina of Time, but he's actually sympathetic this time around? Now, he actually cares about something besides himself, his troop, and he copes somewhat realistically with his issues, and he still manages to feel like an arrogant jerk too. They even gave him a little extra side quest in the 3DS version that gives him and his brothers a bit more depth. It's just a shame his mask was nearly useless in the original. Even ignoring that though, he's a solid character all around and a definite improvement over Ingo. Sidon, Breath of the Wild. Sidon sets such a high mark for the other champion's successor through his linear introduction, it's sad that only Riju comes close. Granted, it's possible to skip a crap ton of his content by just having to write things straight from the start and bypassing the road to the Zora locale, but I doubt first-time players would end up doing so. Also, he's very appealing to many people. Combine that with his fun attitude and you end up with more people pairing Link with him rather than with Zelda, who can never spend any time with us, except in an extremely underrated game. Miko, Majora's Mask. Leave it to Majora's Mask to give us one of the greatest underwater playstyles in all of gaming, and it's all thanks to this initially nearly dead Dilf. Despite the initial drama from him nearly drowning when you first find him, the fact he just gets up and jams his final words to you is ridiculously cool. See, for all the dark and spooky atmosphere Majora's Mask is known for, the fact that it can still squeeze in some humor in its scenes and sustain its drama despite that makes it all the more amazing. It's too bad the Zora transformation omits all of his tattoos though. Anyway, there's a lot to infer about his dynamic with the other members of the Indiegogo's, but the only one I'll mention here is that there's some really strong implications that he's the father of Lulu's kids. There's some room for doubt, but come on, it's pretty clear he couldn't keep it in his pants, especially considering he doesn't have any. Hell, he was holding hands with her in the flashback. 100% proof right there. Cass, Breath of the Wild. An awesome idea for an individual. Cass's team is an excellent tool for developers to guide players towards certain locations, and he's nice to see and talk to as well. Combine that with him having a background to look into, such as his family, and you get an amazing new character. Cremia, Majora's Mask. I want mommy, I want milk, I want to be held. Alright, enough of that joke. Cremia's the head of the Romani ranch, and is often busy with her tasks there to really spend time with her younger sister. This can really hurt her if Romani is not saved on the first day, which ends her business, relationships, and life in tragedy, by all accounts. Problem is that, if you defeat them, she never even realizes how close she came to losing everything. So that kinda stinks, since it would have been a very easy way to garner sympathy points for her. There's also the milk escort mission, which, honestly, it's really hard to fail that one. Like, I think you have to straight up let go of the control stick to not have any milk left by the time you're out of that segment. If you hit him just 3 or 4 times, I think you win sequence. Maybe. More relevant, however, is the heart-to-heart monologue she gives you before that sequence, which reveals she's friends with Anju and maybe also had a crush on Cafe. She also clearly suspects the moon's gonna crash. Gee, you think? This really helps her character. That being said, the primary thing that lifts her up on this list is her dialogue on the 3rd day after saving Romani. Like, all of it. Her bleak hope that the moon crashing won't harm her farm, to the acceptance that it will and that there's all there is to it, to her heart-wrenching discussion with her sister on the 3rd night. All of it really helps humanize her as a caring individual who is trying to come to terms with her impending doom. That being said, her dialogue with you on some subsequent escort missions is a little suspect. I recognize you as an adult. Giving an underage stranger a hug? You better let go now, otherwise tonight you'll get a visit from them, Cremia.
FBI, open up!
Darmani, Majora's Mask. I like to think that Darmani is basically Darunia without the stupid bullshit associated with him, like the incessant brother talk, the chauvinistic undertones, or the sage awakening nonsense. By ignoring those things, we boil them down to what's important for making him a great character. A hero who failed his people in their time of need, yet who inspires another to take their place and carry on the task that needs to be done. Anyway, to this day, the scene where we heal Darmani's soul still makes me emotional. Also, he's completely overpowered as a transformation, especially in the 3DS version. Medley, Wind Waker. What a fun character. I like her character arc in relations with other people, and her helping you out in the Earth Temple is great for making up for how she ended up just being used as a damsel in the first temple. Happy Mask Salesman, Majora's Mask. I'm surprised we haven't renamed him to Mysterious Mask Salesman at this point. This guy's a major source of debate in theory due to his strange animation style, his expressions, the fact he's the one who originally had Majora's Mask, whether he's truly the same guy from Ocarina of Time, the Moon Children looking just like him, and so on and so forth. He's pretty critically important given he's the one who explains the Majora's Mask backstory, and he helps you return to your human form once you get the Ocarina back. So I'm all for debating those moments in particular, but after that I find that he's actually just rather nice, and not nearly as omniscient or important as some fans seem to suggest he is. Like, I don't personally believe he realizes you're turning back time with the Ocarina. Now, that being said, if you get a game over by letting the moon crash, the game starts you back on the first day, starting from when this guy told you his now iconic line, "You've met a terrible fate, haven't you?" Which, to me, in some ways, is actually more chilling than the apocalyptic event that just happened, because the implication I get from that is that you're stuck in Termina until you actually accomplish your goal, and he's the one making sure you'll complete it by forcing you to relive the timeline if you don't reset it yourself. Oh, would you look at that, I just made a theory about him. See how easy it is? Pamela and her father, Majora's Mask. I put these two together because of how important the dynamic with each other is for their ranking, but if anyone asks, Pamela is the better character. A sweet-looking girl that matured much earlier than expected because of her father's interests. She has serious issues with the undead roaming near her house, so if you mess around and speak with her wearing the Gibdo mask, well, don't be surprised when she kicks you out. What's cool is that she only develops a respect for you if you save her father directly. If you skip the Iguana questline by just defeating Twin Mold, her father will heal, but she won't give a crap about you and will kick you out of her house if you talk to her, regardless of your current state. Really cool touch, for such a late game character too. Her father has some pretty decent lore regarding some creatures, but comes across as kind of foolish overall. Thankfully, the scene of him playing with his daughter in the ending saves him, and shows he really does care for her. Alright, I can't be the only one who stabbed him like 40 times before figuring out I was supposed to play the Song of Healing to save him, right? Damn, that scene where Pamela stops you from putting him out of his misery really makes me feel guilty. Link's grandma, Wind Waker. Why doesn't she have a name? She could have had a nickname at least. Either way, Link's grandma is the second of the two members of Link's family introduced in the Wind Waker, and honestly, I like her execution much better than Errol's. Namely, you can interact with her for a much longer portion of the game, and you even save her at some point, with direct results. Also, that soup is mucho bueno. Groose, Skyward Sword. The Groose is loose, baby! For a character that initially seems that he will only serve as a minor rival for the game's introduction like Mido before him, Groose's development from bumbling doofus into a staunch ally and caring friend is absolutely delightful to see. The only thing I wish we got to see more of was his feelings on his two goons, who regrettably end up left on the wayside. Anju, Majora's Mask. If someone asks me what the best side character in the entire franchise is, the answer is Anju. It's been that answer for over 20 years and it is still the answer to this day. She is THE gold standard for a side character, because she's such a well-defined individual thanks to her incredibly detailed schedule that shifts through all 3 days depending on your actions. First off, her mood changes drastically over those 3 days. If you help her on the first day, she'll still be tending the stockpot in herself on the second day, waiting for a response from you. Else, she'll be staying inside her room for most of the day until she goes to the laundry pool to ponder why she couldn't send a response back to Cafe after receiving his letter. On the third day, she can be found in Romany Ranch on the final night if you don't deliver the pendant of memories to her before noon on the final day. Otherwise, she'll be waiting in her wedding dress in the Stockpot Inn's employee room waiting for Cafe, even though the moon's about to land right over her on that very night. Second, she has numerous optional little scenes you can see of her interacting with other characters, which further help define her character. And third, you're never even told to go to the Stockpot Inn either. So this isn't some character that's optional in the sense that you can avoid her with some effort, or that she's quickly introduced to you like Malin and then sent off. No, this is a fully optional character. One of the best characters in the series, and she's truly optional. Thus, the perfect side character. Incidentally, I'd like to share a fun fact regarding her side quest. If you deliver Anju's letter to a mailbox, the postman picks it up on the final day and stops Sakon from stealing on the first night. The postman will try to deliver the letter to Cafe as planned, but he'll promptly disappear when he's about to ring the laundry pool's bell. It's a shame that the game's programmers didn't account for everything that you can do in the game, but the dev cycle for Majora's Mask is pretty damn short, so I can't blame them. Hey, thanks for watching to the end. I get that there's some characters that I could have included, like Pura, but this project was much tougher to complete than I expected, so I left those that I didn't originally write in out to keep it possible to finish. For reference, I started writing way back in like February 2023, and expected to get the whole thing done by April at the latest. Clearly, I underestimated the sheer amount of characters I ended up covering overall. Also, I had a lot less to say about characters past Wind Waker, because by then I was just trying to get past the writing step at least. I think Quill is the one who suffers the most from this. I really didn't spend enough time talking about him, all things considered. Regardless, if you want me to try something like this again with a different franchise or part of Zelda, or just do Tears of the Kingdom rankings, Make sure to comment about it down below, like, and subscribe to the video. Anyway, that's all I had to say. See you all later, and hope you all have a very nice day. Bye-bye!